What's up, guys? Maro here again, back with very interesting book that I just finished reading, Africa's Business Revolution. This book was written by 3 McKinsey Consultants and it was recommended by some of Africa's richest. Aliko Dangote of Nigeria recommended it, Strive Masiyiwa of Zimbabwe recommended it on all their platforms, and I felt like it's a book that I really needed to take a look at, and I just finished reading it. It's a very interesting book, and I thought I would share with you guys what I thought were sort of the main takeaways from this book. It's a very interesting book, and so it's something that I just went over in 5 hours. I was done with it. It's a very quick read if you get it. It's very, very smooth, not dense at all. It's just something that talks about everything, and you really get a grasp of the argument that these guys are trying to make about the African continent, and why in this book they say how to succeed in the next growth market of the world. And so I think the book, really, I would divide it from how I read it. I would say that there were two sort of sides of it. There was why Africa, they were sort of advertising the continent, and then the second thing was how to actually win on the African continent once you come into it, or if you're a citizen of the African continent, if you actually get out of your country, or if you decide to start business in your country. And so the book starts on a very, very light note. There's an interesting story which they give at the start, where they say that they had gone to South Korea to present to executives of one of the biggest conglomerates in South Korea, and they started their presentation with the African map with the 54 countries, and halfway into their presentation of just the map itself and trying to explain the countries, one of the executives raised their hand and they said, "I think you made a mistake. There are 2 Congos on that map." Then the McKinsey consultants looked at them and said, "Yeah, just like there are 2 Koreas, there are 2 Congos. Of course, there's the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there's also the other Congo, which is next to it. And these countries are actually 2 separate countries that are there on the African continent." And so, before I start this video, I want to give you something to be thinking about, which is how many companies on the African continent do you think earn revenues of more than $1 billion US? I'll give you the answer at the end of this video, but start taking a guess and we'll see whether you were in the range or not. And so, starting with why Africa, these guys lay up an argument that I would say would be summed up in 5 points. The first thing really is that they talk of how big the continent is. Africa is a $1.2 billion market. This is something which is huge. It's something that's phenomenal, and it's something that's big. Not only is Africa big though, on top of the fact that Africa is big, it has a big demographic boom that's happening in the continent at the moment. The population is increasing at phenomenal rates. And if you just give you an example, the fastest growing city in Africa, Lagos, according to the United Nations, is adding 77 people every hour. All those people are potential consumers who could make up a bigger African market. So forget the 1.2 billion people. It's actually going to be crazy in terms of the numbers in the near future. Number 3, the demographic boom is actually combined with the GDP boom, where most of the countries on the African continent right now are growing at 6, 7, or even 8%, which is something that's great if you want to consider Africa as a region to go in and start your business, or if you're already in Africa and you want to scale up your business and you're probably trying to figure out where are the consumers going to come from, where are the customers going to come from. These countries are growing, and with the GDP growth, it means that people are having more disposable income in their wallets, which they would spend on your goods or services. Number 4, the interesting thing is that the African consumer market is projected to be a $5.6 trillion market by 2025. This is something that the guys talk about in this book, that the market is growing and $5.6 trillion will be up for tossing by 2025. Where your business will be will determine what share of this $5.6 trillion you're going to be getting as the consumers grow. Number 5, these guys talk about the fact that the continent is increasing in terms of the number of people who are available to work. And by 2034, the continent, the African continent, is expected to have 1.1 billion people who are available for work, who are at working age. And so those are sort of the 5 reasons which they give as to say why you should get into Africa. Now, they also have reasons which they give to say how to actually win in Africa. They have the points they give out, many points they give out, since this is a very big book, but I think I figured out 4 that I think are most important for someone who would want to summarize their work. Number 1, how to win in Africa. You have to harness technology so that you unleash the next wave of innovation. This is something they talk about. They give various examples of companies, especially telecoms companies, who have started things to do with mobile money. These companies have used innovation to harness people, to bring in, for example, people who have had no banking accounts in the past, and they've brought them in with mobile money, and all these people are bankable. They now have a banking track record. They can be given nano loans on their phones, and they can do whatever they want. So this is something that these guys mentioned, that if you're actually going to win in Africa, you have to harness technology, but the technology has to be customized, because in Africa, unlike in other continents, you don't have people with lots and lots of mobile data which is just available. And so you have to harness the technology and actually use it very well. Number 2, you have to build vocational skills for your workers, and you also have to build skills for the future managers, because it's very difficult to find well trained managerial expertise on the continent. You actually have to start a way in which you can have academies. For example, the Dangote Group, which is one of the biggest conglomerates on the African continent, they have their own academy where they take workers who are promising within their workforce. They actually train them to be future managers of the Dangote Group. And so this could be something that could actually be on the lower end of having, hiring costs. In the end, you actually end up educating your own people, and that way you win on the African continent. Number 3, you have to take a very long-term view. These guys have so many examples which they give, but I think one of the examples that resonated with me was the Coca-Cola company, which invested in Angola in the middle of a civil war. They invested in Somalia when everyone else thought Somalia was dead. They invested in Zimbabwe at the height of hyperinflation. When everyone else was getting out of Zimbabwe, Coca-Cola company bought a bottler in Zimbabwe. And so the Coca-Cola company in Africa has taken a very, very long-term view. And if you want to succeed, according to these guys, according to their book, you have to make sure that you also take a very, very long-term view. Point number 4 on how you can actually win in Africa is that these guys say your business needs to be modeled with high volumes, low margins, and a lot of technology involved within the business so that you actually achieve what you're going to do. Why they say this really is that they say the African consumer is still on the lower end in terms of disposable income. There are a lot of consumers, as we have said, a market that currently has 1.2 billion people who are ready to spend. But the interesting thing is that they do not have bigger purses. They have very small purses, but there are so many within their numbers. They are willing to spend, but they don't have a lot of money to spend. And so, according to these guys and according to their book, how you win in the African continent is that you need to make sure that your business depends on low margins. You don't have to make a lot of money on everything that you sell, but you need to make very low margins on what you sell, and you push the volumes. And once you drive the volumes, you see that you end up making money. And if you take a look at all the companies that are operating on the African continent right now, you would see that, big conglomerates like the Dangote Group, they're selling stuff like cement, sugar, salt. They're not having big margins, but everyone buys sugar. And so even if you're selling your sugar and you have a profit of 3 cents or 5 cents per every packet, because of the large volumes, you actually end up in the end making lots of money. I would say that the book is really, you wouldn't say it was really written for young entrepreneurs. It was written for businesses as a whole. I would understand the point of view because this book was written by McKinsey Consultants, who probably consult for large firms and are not talking to young entrepreneurs planning to start their business. But they say that if there are young entrepreneurs on the African continent who have grabbed this book and they want to use it, they should realize that they take their big ideas to continue working on them, and then in the end they should find backers who push them. They give an example of the Tony Elmelo Foundation, which gives out money to young entrepreneurs to go out there and conquer. And I think they have devoted about $10 million to actually make sure that they give support to young entrepreneurs. There are other people who have also been giving support to young entrepreneurs on the African continent. I think there's a prize that Jack Ma gives every year that goes out to African entrepreneurs who are doing great. And so I would say that on the young entrepreneurs side, young entrepreneurs can get a perspective on how to scale up their business from this book. They would probably not get a perspective on how to start a business. And remember that question which I asked you when we started the video, as to say how many companies you think on the African continent are making revenues of more than $1 billion. They asked that question to many executives on the African continent and some of the executives outside the African continent at the World Economic Forum, and only one guy made the correct guess, and it was Aliko Dangote. The number is 400. There are 400 companies currently on the African continent that have revenues of $1 billion or more. It might have shocked you. You might have thought it's too small, but it shows that the bigger pie is there. You can share within this pie, whether you're an employee and you're trying to drive your business so that it becomes a great business, or whether you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to scale up your business. I think this book is really a great read for everyone who wants to sort of get the perspective of it, or if you're just looking for a nice chilled Saturday read. I really think that it's a great recommendation. Go out and pick it. These are very, very bright McKinsey consultants who wrote this book, and I recommend it to everyone. And don't forget to subscribe, of course, if you like my content, or to leave any comment if you have any problems with it.